And we're live.
Okay, terrific. Well, welcome everybody. Here we are, meeting number 4, 5, something like that. I think we're doing really good work. I think that's the first thing I wanted to say. I've been in several meetings this week where people have told me specifically that they really think our committee and the work that we're doing is making a difference in other conversations that are happening in other places. So I was really encouraged to hear that and wanted to share it with you. I wanted to lay out kind of what we're gonna be doing for the next couple of weeks. We didn't think that community standards was a one-day conversation. So we're thinking about doing this over at least 2 weeks before we start trying to make any specific recommendations. And we've kind of roughly divided it into 2 sections, which may overlap, and we may decide there needs to be some sort of third amalgamation. And so the first is today, after talking about sprinkle days versus clump, we'll talk about enforcement, community standards and enforcement. And then next week, we'll talk about community standards and creating culture to support them. So that's kind of the rough way that we've divvied this up. And as we go along, if there are other pieces of the puzzle that you think we need to talk about in more detail, we'll do that. The only thing we'll be making a recommendation about today is this first question of sprinkle versus clump, and the document that Shana sent out about different options, different ways that things could be sprinkled versus clumped. So we would like to be able to make a recommendation about that today. I also wanted to say that we have invited today the co-chairs of the Campus Safety Commission to join us, Devetta Holman and Jim Harrington. I can't see everybody, I don't think, but I am assuming they're with us, or that they will be with us perhaps very soon. So I did want to let you know that they were joining us today, and we can consult them and ask them to join in that discussion when we get there. So at that point, I'm going to turn it over to Reeves, who has a few opening comments, and then will take us through the Wellness Day distribution conversation.
Great, thanks, Mimi. Hi everyone. I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to make a few comments before we go into the discussion, and then be able to facilitate that discussion. I know we'll go about it pretty similar to what we have past discussions with panelists raising their hands, and just having kind of a thoughtful discussion about how we should be going about wellness days. However, what I wanted to bring up beforehand was just kind of a perspective from a student's lens, just given the circumstances and how, obviously the spring break isn't going to be traditional to any circumstance, and given that we have 5 sprinkle days, that I believe in a vast majority, or a lot of students believe, that it should at a very minimum be more clump oriented rather than just 5 sprinkle days throughout the semester individually. So I believe that 5 sprinkle days throughout the semester is not analogous to a mental health break. It's just essentially more work days, and there is a negative connotation that is associated with wellness group days, with partying, because you think that students are going to go away and party, which will inherently increase the spread of the disease. But students also need these breaks for jobs, internship applications, resting, and to accommodate family needs, especially given the circumstances. I know we all know that this has been difficult, but the toll that this semester alone has taken on students and the Carolina community as a whole goes to show for itself. We also believe that the plan for increased testing and enforcement of community standards should be able to help to alleviate some of these concerns about travel. And I also wanted to add, especially from a GPS or a graduate and professional student perspective, that they're also in support of these breaks. So those involved mostly in coursework as opposed to teaching or research have been particularly supportive of breaks for the time, or for the same reasons as undergraduates. For example, rest, relaxation, mental health, etc. And I know that TAs are also able to benefit from having a break from teaching, and researchers from a day out of the lab because, even given the circumstances from this semester, they're constantly in the lab, especially, where they're permitted by experimental timelines. And just to go beyond that, beyond a student's perspective, it's important to acknowledge that these break days, aside from just, a few 3-day weekends sprinkled throughout the semester, that it's important to the entire community as opposed to just students. I just kind of want to throw that perspective in there because I know a lot of the students on this committee were discussing originally when we were deciding what start dates and potential spring breaks would look like. That I just wanted to preface this conversation with that since we're kind of going back into it before we go ahead and start our community standard discussion. And I know Shayna, you sent out earlier today the several options for the scenarios that could accommodate wellness days throughout the semester. So there, I believe, 4 or 5 throughout. And so if people have that pulled up, if anyone has any questions or anything, we could go ahead and foster that discussion. I don't know, Shayna, if before we started that, you wanted to kind of explain I know you, myself, and Mimi talked a little bit before this meeting about, the 4-day weekends and the 3-day weekends distribution, but if you wanted to bring anything about that otherwise, I'd be happy to kind of facilitate this discussion moving forward.
Sure. So I distributed the Excel spreadsheet earlier today, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can walk through it. Can everybody see the screen? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So basically, in the Supreme Court case of Klump versus Clark, the things that I have highlighted in yellow are 4-day weekends. The things that are highlighted in orange are 3-day weekends. And the blue on April 2nd is the only given holiday, and that's on a Friday. And then down below each scenario, 1, 2, 3, and 4, I've sort of outlined whether they're clumped or sprinkled. So in scenario 1, there are 2 4-day weekends and 2 sprinkle days. In scenario 2, there are 2 3-day weekends and 3 sprinkle days. In scenario 3, there's 1 4-day weekend, 1 3-day weekend, which is coupled with that 1 holiday, and 2 days midweek. And in the 4th scenario, there's 1 3-day weekend and 2 days midweek.
Shane, can I ask one question real quick?
Yes.
Just to clarify before we start talking. In scenario 3 and 4, should the no Monday lines be on the next week, technically? I mean, to make them 4-day weekends?
Those are not 4-day weekends. Those are only 3-day weekends.
Oh, so it is the first, so it's the Monday at the beginning of the week.
Correct.
And then we still have the Friday off.
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Yep. And the only day that Friday holiday is in play to make a longer weekend is on scenario 1.
Wait, maybe can I go back to scenario 1? So on the first yellow, which represents a 4-day weekend, it says no Monday and no. Okay, never mind. I thought I said Thursday, but I see it says Tuesday, so I'm fine. Sorry.
It's okay. It's a little confusing to weed through, but I thought the highlighting would help.
So I think, so we have, it looks like there are options that kind of range from high clump to, to low clump. That's more, all of them have a little clump and a little sprinkle with the exception. Yeah, I think most all of them. I mean, I suppose scenario 4 is the least clumpy.
It only has 1 long weekend. The
Yep.
other options have 2 long weekends.
So maybe a starting point is to think about which end of the spectrum we want to tilt toward.
Right. On that point, I very much agree with Reeves. I just don't think something like scenario 2 and maybe it's 4. I don't think it's really a break to have a day every 3 weeks, or I definitely think we need, like I think I mentioned earlier in the conversation several weeks ago that in the fall we don't have a full week, right? But we have fall break a few days, and then we have Thanksgiving, and it's 2 clumps, and it really gives you that break and relief that students and others have not had this semester. And I think people are really feeling it. So I would definitely argue strongly for something that clumps them together in ways that I'm still weeding through the scenarios here. I don't know if you can make the Excel a little bigger, but the font's really small on my computer. But so I would definitely argue strongly for something that clumps some of these things together where students get a true break. Because I agree with exactly what Reeves said. If it's a day here, a day there, it's not really a break, right? You end up doing work that day or something. So that's just my thought. And I guess PS, students have told me the same thing when I've asked my students, right? They want some kind of clumps so they actually can take a break.
I tried to make that larger. Did that help at all?
Yes. Dana, I don't know if this came up. Is there a particular reason? Because I'm looking at in scenario 3, you essentially have a 3-day week. You have that Monday off followed by what would be, I guess, conventionally known as spring holiday. Was there a reason why they didn't tack that Monday onto the following week so that you have a Friday to Monday 4-day weekend? Did that come up with the registrar?
Well, not that I know of, but there is the scenario 5, which is some combination of single days or couple days that we can create.
Yeah, I guess I would propose and I'm speaking from conversations that we've had on the student side, is I think scenario 3 looks good, except that you swap that Monday from March 29th to April 5th. Otherwise, scenario 3 would be the same. That would be my recommendation as a scenario 5.
I agree.
Yeah, so are you, just to clarify, Ryan, you're saying that the days off during the week become a long weekend instead of days off during the week? Is that what?
Well, no, I'm just moving the Monday from the 29th preceding the 3-day weekend to the following Monday, thus making it a 4-day weekend. And then you end up with 2 4-day weekends, and they're spaced out a bit more than they are in scenario 1.
So I think my only caution would be that, so the registrar sent us these scenarios. So she designed them taking into account, I guess, myriad other factors that I don't even know what all those factors are. So I would be hesitant to tweak too much. If we could go with the scenarios we have, we know that these 4 scenarios will work with the requirements of the registrars, and whereas we don't necessarily know that others will work. I don't know why they wouldn't work, but.
Well, we should also add to that the scenario that Ryan said makes Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes miss both a Monday and a Friday. And teachers are not going to want to miss that much class time. So we got to balance the Tuesday, Thursday, and the Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Yeah, that would be one of the considerations.
So we could move it to Thursday, just like scenario 1, and still have that 4-day weekend.
So we have hands raised. Do we want to?
Yeah, I think Martin, that was the first one to raise her hand.
Yeah, so I just wanted to support the comments about the clumping versus single days. And of course, with this consideration for not always taking those days from the same or taking classes from the same days of the week. Because what I'm concerned about with single days is as others have said, no one's really going to take that break, especially if there are assignments or things coming up the very next day. It's going to be really difficult to actually have that time off. And I think what we're trying to encourage people to do is to seriously take a break. But I want to acknowledge the concerns about too long of a period of time where folks might travel and things like that. I don't know if we'll ever be able to control that, but I think for the vast majority of the folks who will certainly need that break, I think the clumping versus single days or sprinkle days might be the best way to go, especially as we consider the mental health needs that we've all been alluding to throughout all of our conversations. So I just wanted to throw in my support for the clumping days.
Appreciate it. And then next is the Joy.
So, not to throw a whole wrench into this, but I just hope that we're not building something that's artificial and looks good, but doesn't do the purpose. I mean, the whole idea of not having spring break was the students wouldn't go away, and they're going to go away if they have a 4-day weekend. And I don't know if we're just changing everything and coming up with all these scenarios and sprinkled here and there and clumps here and there. Are we mitigating what we thought we were mitigating by doing this? Or now have we created 2 4-day weekends that people would go away? They've got 2 times that they would leave campus and come back. I'm not saying I don't want to do this, but I just feel like there's a piece of me that says, are we doing something that artificially looks like we're doing something about spring break when we're actually creating 2 spring breaks situations?
I think I hear what you're saying. I think the only thing is that a decision has already been made about spring break. So that's off the table, like we can't go backwards. They've made that decision. So
right. But if we're going to a 4-day week, are we getting back into, I'm just asking, are we getting back into the same situation by creating 4-day weekends? Are we getting back into the same reason we got rid of spring break? I'm just raising the question.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that, if students are going to travel, they're going to travel. I think what we're trying, in my mind, we're trying to discourage getting on airplanes. And if you have a 3 or 4 day weekend, I think you're discouraging that. Students are, in reality, students are going to do what they're going to do. If they're going to go on a road trip, if they're going to drive home, things like that, they're going to do that. And I don't know. I just think we have to balance trying to discourage behavior we don't want to see with just the reality that, people need breaks, right? People need breaks, especially students, but also others at the university. So I think by not having that full week, right? The full, I don't know what students typically do for fall break, but you don't hear stories about people going to Palm Beach and all these places for fall break, right? But you do hear it for spring break. Of course, it's a tradition. So I think by not having that whole week, that traditional spring break, I think that helps.
Yeah, I'm not against the clumping. I'm not voting for sprinkling, but I just wanted to raise the question.
No, that's a very valid point. I know someone asked the students, I think it was Donna, what students are going to do. If I had a 4-day weekend, I would sleep for 48 hours on end right now. So I think that's one point of concern, and especially with the students, at least that I've talked to pretty recently, about the potential of having, clumps versus just sprinkle days. A lot of students would rather just go home and be able to spend some time with family than, like Seth mentioned, get a flight to, I don't know, Cocoa Beach, Florida or something like that. It's definitely a different consideration, especially since we don't have that full week. I know Rich also has his hand raised.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with all of the conversation that I've heard. I too am worried about students going away on long breaks. I wonder if there's something we could do about recommending enhanced testing on the return from those longer breaks. I don't know if there's anything we could do like that to address this concern.
And
we could certainly recommend it.
Then Jennifer.
Thanks, Reeves. Agreed. A lot of good conversation, and I want to acknowledge how important it was to hear that statement from you at the top, Reeves, about students and students' needs, specifically with respect to wellness days. I also want to elevate that staff also are very much in need of these wellness days as we go through the semester. And in speaking to folks in the graduate school and the graduate education community who are part of the staff, their preference was for scenario one because of the consistency, because it kind of varies up those long weekends with some individual days where there's a good mental break. And they felt like you could actually get some true rest. But I also want to circle back to some other comments that have been made, which is, what is the goal of having the days off? And if we do want to ensure that the goal is met, I think that this committee might consider recommending either of two things, or maybe both. One, for example, partnering with the community to see how those days off look. I love your point, Reeves, that you would just sleep for the 2 days, but there might be some other folks who, in order to make sure that their students, to keep them engaged and here, thinking about how we could partner with student affairs to make sure that wellness activities are highlighted, whether it's yoga or all sorts of things that I'm engaged in now that are virtual, but also with the community, like delivering, more food delivery, some neat specials during that time. I mean, all sorts of ways that we could partner to make wellness days a kind of stay in Chapel Hill wellness opportunity. So just want to highlight those two things, and then just note that there was a staff preference among those who I spoke with for scenario one.
I also think that kind of feeds into, I think someone mentioned in the chat as well, the community standards discussion, especially with that sense of community. I do know some other AAU universities are having either a full spring break or at least a partial spring break where they're, strongly encouraging students to stay on campus. So I don't know what that discussion would look like too, but I feel as though, they're pretty connected in that aspect. Lamar.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate something and also agree with something that Seth said earlier, which is that students are still traveling, especially if the majority of students will be interacting with the university in a remote fashion. Many of them will travel regardless. In fact, Orange County did report that in the days following Labor Day, they saw a spike in cases, a smaller jump in cases as opposed to before Labor Day. And so I don't necessarily think that because students have access to 4-day weekends, they will be more inclined to travel as opposed to anything they're doing now, especially for our students who are not taking courses in person. But also to speak to, I think, Joy's point about maybe we're taking away from the point of not having a spring break. What I can say is that by providing us, me and my peers included, with the access to a longer break over the weekend, I do intend and hope that many of my peers will take advantage of that and rest. I can't speak for all because, of course, some may not do that, but I don't think it'll be any different statistically than what they're doing now or what they might do on any given weekend.
Great point, Lamar. It looks like there's a few more hands raised before we go into the community standards discussion. Sharon?
I think I was just going to pull something that I put in the chat, and that's basically that the community standards might offset some of what the recommendations we make for community standards might offset some of the worry about what students might be doing with the weekend or the travel. I also just want to reiterate for staff, my graduate students and the undergraduates here, that, people are really afraid right now. And so I think, wellness cannot happen over a 3-day weekend. It's that extra day that puts those 2 days before it that allow for those other 2 days that come for you to really kind of unwind. And so I just want to reiterate that. And I think we should take care of this at community standards. They should be pretty stringent so that people understand to be present in this community, they're going to have to do some things. All of us are. Thank you, Reeves.
Absolutely. Kier?
Thanks, Reeves. I completely agree with what Sharon said. I think that's a very valuable point. Just to comment on Joy's question, I thought about that before the meeting and with the comparison of the 4-day break versus just a regular spring break. But I think one of the differences is with a regular spring break, we have those 2 weekends that kind of border the 5 days off, right? So that's technically a 9-day break. And that'll factor in travel and anything else that potentially students would do if they had that extended break. But I think with a 4-day break, if people are trying to travel somewhere, they're going to have to factor in that travel time, which I think is also going to limit people moving elsewhere. So just going to add that comment there. And I think scenario 3 looks pretty nice. I just want to point out one thing, which is we do have that 4-day break at the beginning of the semester. I think that's week 5. But also where we have that no Monday off in week 11, that is 2 3-day weekends back to back, I believe. So if there is concern about that 4-day break, I think that could be mitigated with those 3-day weekends. And I hope that makes sense. I think that's what I'm seeing here on the calendar. But that could be a potential solution if we're concerned about having 4 days versus 3.
Oh, absolutely. It seems that, there's an overwhelming majority that supports, clump days over sprinkle days. As far as the suggestions go for scenarios, and correct me, Mimi and Shanna, if I'm wrong, does that look that there's a wider support for scenario 1 and scenario 3 as opposed to the alternatives?
I'm not hearing any support for single sprinkle days. And so that would alleviate 2 and 4 effectively. So we're really, if in agreement, what I'm hearing is either 1 or 3.
I think that's correct.
I've also seen some comments in the chat where both benefits and concerns with scenario 1 regarding the 2 clump days that are pretty close together. One being a concern that, how close together they are, and then one being a potential benefit with the sprinkle days at the beginning of the semester before people are more worn out and fatigued. So I think there's something to be said about that. And it just looks like the distribution of the clump days would be the biggest consideration.
So why don't we focus our attention then on scenarios 1 and 3 and have some discussion, like if we assume that those are the 2 favorites at the moment, maybe people can have some conversation around why they like one or the other. Jennifer has brought up that staff like 1 overall.
I'm making a change based on Kira's observation, which I didn't catch earlier, but in scenario 3, there are 2 3-day weekends back to back. This week has that Friday. So it'll be 2 3-day weekends bookending week 11.
Plus a 4-day weekend, right?
Plus a 4-day weekend and 2 clumped days midweek.
Why is that? Good Friday or something like that?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Kira.
You're welcome. I think Ethan and some of the other students noted that before, just in a message, but thank you.
So, if I'm just looking at this, it looks like scenario 3 has more clumping and more spaced clumping. And whereas scenario 1 puts the clumping close together with these kind of little mini breaks, I guess. Wonderful Wednesdays, we might call them.
And I say I wasn't getting in scenario 1 that week 11, that Friday, that must be Good Friday, right? So there are 2 4-day weekends in scenario 1.
Yes, that's correct.
Gotcha. Okay, that was the only reason I wasn't leaning toward. I see. Great. I see.
Spring holiday, Seth. Spring holiday.
Spring holiday. Okay.
And it looks like Joy also has her hand raised again.
So I know this probably doesn't happen a lot in the college, but maybe it does, is blocked classes, like a class meets 1 day a week. And if you look at scenario 3, we're already starting on a Tuesday, so you miss a Monday that week, and then you're missing 2 more Mondays. I don't know if that needs to be taken into consideration as which days of the week are being missed more than others, if that would make a difference to faculty who have blocked classes.
Right. I guess
The same thing would be true if they have lab, right? If they have chem lab on Mondays, right? That just throws a kink in the lab. Same thing for recitations. Those only meet once a week. If you miss a whole lot of the same day of a week, then that's going to throw some courses off.
To that same point, though, I think scenario 1 does not adequately fix it on that concern because there are 2 Wednesdays instead of 2 Mondays. And the reason that I would favor scenario 3 on that specific issue over scenario 1 is that those Mondays there are only 3 weeks there that are disrupted in some format, whereas in scenario 1 there are 4 weeks. So taking those 2 separate Wednesdays off, I feel would disrupt more classes that have only a 1-day setting, or that students will only meet 1 day a week, but there are multiple sections across the week. So for that reason, I think scenario 3, in my mind, does a better job of preventing some of those issues around single days being off multiple weeks. The other reason I would favor scenario 3 would just be that it doesn't have those single days that we talked about being the issues with scenario 2 and 4. Scenario 1 still keeps 2 of those Wednesdays off, which I feel I continue to say that don't provide adequate breaks for either students or faculty, and just end up being other work days. And because scenario 3 does not have any of those single days, I think that's really the one that in my mind addresses the student need the best.
Thanks, Ethan. And then Seth. Oh, yep. Let's go ahead and talk.
No, you can see more people than me. So
You're fine. Go ahead, Seth.
Well, that's a good point. With I was leaning more towards scenario 1, but with the scenario now fully understanding it all, but with scenario 3, I don't know how many students have Friday classes, but in week 14, if they get a Wednesday and Thursday off, we may have a lot of people skipping class on Friday, right? It's too bad that couldn't be a Thursday, Friday, but I guess we can't change the options here. That's really my only concern with scenario 3 is, are people going to go to class on Friday, or is it just going to be like, oh, I've got Thursday, Friday, Wednesday, Thursday, but not Friday off? So I was leaning more towards scenario 1 for that reason. But I think there's pros and cons of each.
I think that's definitely a valid point. That kind of goes back to what Joy mentioned earlier too, because there's definitely something to be said about, if the students aren't going to have classes, oftentimes it's going to be, a Friday or a Monday. So that might incline students to potentially take another day off. But that's also pros and cons with each one. And then Donna.
what if, I know we don't really want to tweak any of the days, but I like scenario 1, but what if we change that first no Wednesday to a no Friday? Then it becomes a 3-day weekend. So then you get 2 4-day weekends, 1 3-day weekend, and they're spread out, and you still get that 1 day during the week toward the end of the semester. So just change it from Wednesday to Friday.
I just don't know.
And that also avoids, if people have just Wednesday classes.
I think we will, I can only assume that the registrar presented what she presented for, because she's taken into account all of the different classroom hours that are required for each day of class, that she's considered block schedules, those sorts of things, the recitations. So I'm really hesitant to tweak because.
Well, she does offer us the scenario 5. So I'm just saying, if we just took scenario 1 and changed that Wednesday to a Friday, it would give the students more 3-day, 4-day weekends and spread out. And again, it's a Friday. So if it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, it's still the same day. So it shouldn't change the contact hours.
All right, scenario 5 is build your own, right? So with these rules, so.
So she's saying it must be a combination of 3 Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, or 2 Tuesday, Thursdays, or 3 Tuesday, Thursdays, and 2 Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. Those are the parameters for the build your own.
Right. And my change doesn't alter that. So
I'm trying to remember. I think this was it's specified in the last campus message, but does this spring calendar incorporate reading days? Because if it doesn't, then having that 4-day weekend toward the end of April can be helpful in getting folks ready for exams.
Yeah, Ryan, if you'll look at the top of the screen there, the reading days are May 6th, Tuesday, May the 6th, and Wednesday, looks like the 12th. That doesn't
Thanks, Chris. I missed that.
Yeah.
So Donna, your scenario 5 would be changing the first no Wednesday in scenario 1 to a no Friday. Is that correct?
yes,
Okay. And everything else the same.
right. It maintains spacing. It still allows clumping. It keeps contact hours the same, in terms of Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Tuesday, Thursday.
Okay.
So that is that scenario, and that adds another 3-day weekend. Oops. So that's 1, 3.
Joy, did you have another question, or is that just from your previous one?
I was just getting ready to click my lower hand.
Oh, sorry about that.
In the same vein, would it be possible in scenario 3 to move, say, that Wednesday, Thursday in week 14 to a Thursday, Friday? Again, just shifting a Wednesday to a Friday, but that would take away some of the concern about students skipping class on the Friday, and still have a more cohesive week 14 schedule with class being on Monday, Wednesday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
So what was that option?
That would be shifting the Wednesday, Friday break in week 14. Sorry, the scenario 3. So it'd be the same as scenario 3, just with shifting the Wednesday, Thursday in week 14 to a Thursday, Friday break.
Does that give us the same parameters up here?
I believe so, since it's still one Monday, 2 Mondays and a Wednesday off, and then a Tuesday and a Thursday off.
The only thing to point out is that remember that you got the 3-day weekend prior to the spring holiday. Then you've got the spring holiday weekend, and then 2 weeks later, another. So there's a lot of clumping of the 2-day weekends, or sorry, 3-day weekends. Whereas the current scenario 5 at least spreads it out.
Yeah, I do agree on that point. I'm still concerned about that Wednesday off in the middle of a week. That's in the current scenario 5 or the current scenario 1 being disruptive to classes and not really fulfilling that 5th day of break.
Yeah, toward that end, I guess I would favor, I think at this point, scenario 3 because it's spread out. And you have more, you're going to get a break at particular times versus it all being, there are clumps, but they're not clumped together.
It looks like Aaron, your hand's raised.
Sure. I thought there was a thoughtful comment from the audience or the observers on what is a staff holiday? What is our behavior during spring break? Are these just days in which students are not taking class, or are these also days in which other people have off? And then my second was to highlight what I put into the chat. I thought we were getting really close on a philosophy, which was, should we do 4 days, 4 days plus 3, rather than we're starting. I think it's too granular for a group of 35 people to talk about moving this Wednesday to the following Tuesday. We have big agenda items ahead of us today. Could we agree on philosophy and then give our chairs and the registrar and the provost and others the task of operationalizing our preference?
So I can answer the part about staff behavior on spring break. Nothing really changes for staff. We don't have a break during that time. Some areas do things like staff retreats or other things that don't involve students, but there is no formal break for staff.
Might we recommend? I know there are universities that do close. They close for a period of time during breaks like spring break or during fall break.
Well, if we were to move toward philosophy, then so you had mentioned, Aaron, we like 4 days more than 3. Would we also say we like more spread out across the semester versus less? Would that be a common sentiment? More spread, not in terms of sprinkle days, but spread the clumps out versus, for instance, scenario 1 that really puts them together, very close together with, 2 weeks of class time in between. Or is that not important to people?
I'm in favor of spreading them out.
Mimi, what I'm also hearing is on these things that we're trying to recreate our own scenarios, it sounds like everybody's trying to get rid of that one day in the middle of the week. I don't think there's any support for that.
So by way of philosophy, we could say that we think the Orphan Wednesday should be addressed, that we'd like a sprinkling of the clumps.
Before we head into a vote, I do want to point out Richard and Ethan both have their hands raised. So Richard, I think yours was up first.
Hey, thank you very much. And I just want to support a general philosophy regarding supporting the feelings of the students. I am a staff and I also have a teaching responsibility. And in my experience, and my experience doesn't represent all staffs, I haven't had a spring break since I was an undergrad, therefore communicating to me that spring break is a student focus, especially an undergraduate student focus thing. And we've kind of interrupted that. Obviously not us, but this once in a lifetime pandemic has interrupted that. And so far I've heard a support of scenario 3 from the majority of the students. And please forgive me if I am, misspeaking or not speaking correctly. And I think because of that overwhelming support, at least that I feel like I hear from scenario 3, I would be in support of that as a person that is not necessarily affected by these breaks like an undergrad would. And I would also just like to point out just one more quick thing, and it's a particular date. And I think it's important to contextualize the conversations that we're having, because I think these things are important. But again, I don't want to get our eye off of the prize or our eye off the goal, not for too long, because I would actually point people's attention to December 10th. December 10th is not on our calendar for any kind of academic operations, but I will point out that it could very well be the darkest day so far of this pandemic. The reason why I say December 10th specifically is because November 3rd is a massive event which everybody in the country participates in-person voting. And there's going to be a lot of people in that population who don't necessarily wear masks. And so therefore you have a spreader event, the likes of which we've never seen. And then just a little under 3 weeks following that, you have Thanksgiving. And then just 2 weeks following Thanksgiving, which is about the incubation period, you land on December 10th. And I am predicting that we are going to see numbers as far as infections, the likes of which we've never seen. And so almost all of our conversations prior to December 10th are going to be one way. Following December 10th, I guarantee you this pandemic is going to look very different. It's going to be very worse. And so I just want people to kind of contextualize the future that they're talking about. But that's just one thing that I just want to bring into focus. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Richard. Oh, sorry, Mimi.
Yeah, no, I was just, that was sobering. And, you know, definitely something to think about. You know, I do want to bring up the idea. So I'm all about the philosophy, but we sort of talked about the philosophy before, which is sort of how the registrar came up with these scenarios. So, you know, maybe a way to go would be elimination. Are there some scenarios that we would take off the table completely? And then maybe we could just prioritize those that we like, you know, like in the same way we did before with just a show of hands, and we can just submit numbers, you know, 15 people like this scenario, 3 liked this one. These we all agreed to take off by consensus. So we at least narrow it for the registrar.
I think we could definitely eliminate 2 and 4, but there might be something to be said about if we want to eliminate 1 and 3 and stick to these new 2 scenarios, or remain at the original 2 scenarios, 1 and 3, before we vote. But Mimi, I know you're better at organizing the vote with the raise hand function, so I don't know if you want to take over for that.
Before we vote, just something that Mimi has said I wanted to echo is that I think that because the registrar weighed these out in such a certain way, we don't really know if our new scenarios will work based on her metrics. And so I'm really in favor of really focusing on the ones that we were given, only because, like I said, we have to send them to her. She'll have to verify that it actually doesn't meet whatever requirements we have, depending on hours. And because, as we all know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes are typically shorter than Tuesday, Thursday classes and things like that. And so I just prefer if we stuck to the ones that we were given.
I propose a process. Could we type into, we can show hands, but I'd like no preference to be an option. So, or we could type into the chat, drop our favorite number, or type no preference, but I bet we're almost there.
Okay, why don't we start? So let's do this. How about does anyone object to eliminating scenario 2 and 4? If you object, please raise your hand. Aaron, your hand is raised. I don't know whether you mean for it to be raised. I don't think you do.
I don't. I didn't. Sorry, my little blue hand and I are not getting along.
All right. So I'm not seeing anyone raising their hands on that. So we could say 2 and 4 are off the table. Good? Okay. So that leaves us with 1, 3, and 5. Would anyone move to take one of those off the table? Or do we want to vote among those 3 for a start? Okay, let's vote among those 3 for a start. So how many people would choose as their first preference scenario 1?
Are we raising our blue hands? Is that what we're doing?
Yes, please raise your blue hands.
For scenario
Amy, I don't have that option because I'm sharing my screen, so I'll weigh in in the chat.
I won't. Let's say co-chairs don't vote. Okay, so Kathy says 1. Okay, so I see 1 blue hand for scenario 1. For scenario 3, how many blue hands for your first, if this is your first preference?
But sorry, we're also going to vote on the modified scenario.
We're gonna start with 1, 3, and 5.
The existing ones. Okay, got it.
Okay, whoops.
Is there a scenario 6 outside that little box there?
I don't think we have consensus on that. For 6.
May I take back my vote?
Your vote for
Kathy's handed
One.
up twice.
which one? Which do you prefer, Kathy?
If we're going to vote on 5,
Okay, so you're going to not vote yet.
yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that means we can take scenario 1 off the table since we only had 1 vote for that. So this, and we no longer have a vote for that.
So Mimi, just a point of clarification, are we going to be voting on 3 and the external column outside of scenario 5, which was similar to 3, except one small difference?
Well, I thought we would start with 1, 1, 3, and 5, and then see where we were. But we could, I mean, we can add, we can call that 6. Is that what people want to do?
I mean, if it's
Okay.
going to be considered, it would change how people vote. So I think we have to decide before people vote.
Okay, that's all right. So let's consider 3, 5, and 6 since we've taken 1 off the table. So will everyone lower their hands and we're going to start over, okay, with 3, 5, and 6.
Mimi, can I make a quick suggestion?
Sure.
Or just a thought. I think because we know the first 4 scenarios work with the registrar, could we have that vote separately and then have the vote about these 2 additional options as a different vote? And then maybe you can completely reject this, but maybe at the end we can have a vote about whether people would prefer the options that are confirmed by the registrar versus the options that we propose, just so they have a better understanding of what we're proposing. So I'm worried that if we all vote right now in favor of option 6, for example, and then the registrar can't actually make that happen, then we may not have had a chance to make the best recommendation we'd like to.
So at this point, if we were to make a recommendation based on the registrar's presented scenarios, it sounds like scenario 3 is the only viable one left.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
What everybody sees. So we may not need to take that. So we can say that.
Well, except that we were voted on scenario 1 when we thought that 5 and 6 were in them.
Only one person voted for scenario 1 and then she took back her vote.
Well, I know, but I would have voted for it if we didn't have scenario 5 in there, but
We had 20 votes for scenario 3, and there are only 34 of us there. So there's a clear preference. Do you want to ask the question of 3 versus 6? Were those the 6 the modification of 3?
5 was also a modification of 1.
But we only have one person saying that they are interested in 5 versus 1.
Well, we don't know because we haven't asked everybody. Let's, I think
that's fine. If you want to go with, I mean, what Kira said, among the first 4, there seems to be a majority of people like scenario 3. So that can be one of our first things that we say.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So if 1 through 4 are the only possibilities, we're in accord that scenario 3 is the preference. We can say that. If tweaking is allowed, what if we look between scenario 3, 5, and 6 and do a vote for those 3? Okay. So between scenarios 3, 5, and 6, how many people prefer scenario 3? Please raise your hand.
Can we get Seth to lower his hand first?
Seth, lower. Okay, thank you. All right. So for 3, how many people if we're looking at 3, 5, and 6, how many prefer scenario 3? Okay, I'm seeing 4. All
It's
right.
5. There were 5 hands.
You did. Okay, thank you. 3, 5, and 6. All right, now, for those of you who prefers scenario 5 as their first preference. Please raise your blue hands now. I'm seeing 4. Okay, and scenario 6. Okay, scenario 6 looks to be the preferred option of those.
17.
Okay. All right. And I'm going to think about it afterwards and I'll add me to one of these. Okay, well, that's good. So I think we can make those recommendations. That's terrific. All right. So let's move on.
Amy, this is Chris. I think I got a call earlier from the registrar's office. The sooner we can let them know these recommendations, the better.
Okay, we can write them up. And if I would like to ask the committee's permission, because this is exceedingly straightforward. This is not some sort of complex calculus in the same way that would it be okay if I just write them up and the co-chairs and I approve them and send them versus bringing them back to the committee?
I think that's totally fine. That's totally fine with me.
Okay. All right, good. That'll just save us a step or something simple. Thank you. And okay, let's move into our community standards. And I guess I wanted to open this up. I was really, Shana, do you mind taking the screen
I
share?
can't find the stop. It's hiding. Stop share.
I think I wanted to start this conversation by really talking about this as community standards. I was very struck by what Aaron said last week about that at Duke, there were faculty that were violating community standards by having gatherings and that there were outbreaks happening among faculty accordingly. I can't find any documentation of that, but I don't doubt that that's happening. I also know, Shana and I have talked, and at the beginning of in August, there were some issues with staff following community standards. So all of that is to say, this is not necessarily a student problem. This is a community problem. There are members of our community in various businesses and various places that are more or less willing to enforce mask wearing. We have all kinds of issues related to this. And I think some of our stated material on the Carolina Together website is confusing about what the actual, the gatherings policy. I read it recently and it's very confusing as to what is what. So Kim, I think, brought up earlier in the chat idea that whatever policies we are recommending be vetted by the Ethics and Policy Office so that they can be worded very clearly before they go up on the website, so everybody knows what they can and cannot do. So with that preface, we have 2 guests with us today. We have Jonathan Sauls and we have Margaret Campbell from the Orange County Health Department. Jonathan was going to talk, I think, a little bit about kind of generally how community standards have been evolving since the start of the semester in the fall, and as well enforcement, what's working, what's not, where we need to think about this more. And then Margaret Campbell is joining us in order to talk a little bit about difficulties around contact tracing and students and maybe faculty and staff, I have no idea, but people's reluctance to engage in that process, what the realities are there that we need to be thinking about. And so again, not trying to get to any particular recommendations today, just to begin having this conversation and thinking about these issues. Jonathan, do you want to start us off?
Sure, and thanks, Mimi, for having me. You've probably gotten your fill of my coming and sharing information, but I'm happy to be helpful where I can. I'll give a little bit of an overview, if you will, about sort of the ecosystem that is compliance and enforcement, and then certainly invite folks as they have questions. And one of the important things, and I appreciate that lead in, because this is not a set of standards that are applicable only to students. And there is ample indication, as we are all seeing, that this is a hugely divided question from many members of our community, perhaps less so in the immediate Chapel Hill Carrboro area, but certainly in North Carolina and in other places across the country. These are areas where there is deep distrust, resentment, perceptions for and against some of the public health requirements that have been put forward. Another complicating factor, of course, is that there are many different authorities who get to promulgate different rules. So we have state guidelines that at times have been coextensive with what's required by local authorities, be it the Orange County or Chapel Hill or Carrboro. And then, of course, we may present our own policies relative to your engagement as a student, staff, or faculty member at the university. Where possible, it's nice when those things all line up. It minimizes some of the confusion. But as we have seen with just the structure of how we have reopened the state, we've been going through various phases, which means some of the rules that applied even at the beginning of this semester have not continued unchanged throughout the entirety of this semester. And so it is, I think, reasonably confusing for folks to try and keep track of what you can and cannot do. And then when it comes to enforcement, one of the things that I'm always keen to point out, the university does not enforce the law or ordinance. It enforces its own university policies. In many cases, those policies are one and the same. We have a mask requirement. We have a social distancing requirement. We have other things attendant to health requirements. But strictly speaking, we are not applying the governor's order, or we are not applying a local ordinance. Those are within the jurisdiction and ability of those entities to enforce them. So when an event happens off campus, we are dependent upon becoming knowledgeable about that event and then making an assessment from an enforcement standpoint of, did that behavior violate a university policy? And it is only if there is a university policy that the university asserts its enforcement jurisdiction. It's the only legal way that we would have to enforce our jurisdiction. We are still in the process of crunching numbers for a variety of privacy reasons. We don't publish each individual student's case, but I can tell you we've had nearly 500 referrals for various conduct issues since the start of this semester, and that is just COVID related. We are still, of course, in the everyday business of enforcing other conduct codes around alcohol, campus code of conduct, academic misconduct, et cetera. These are just COVID-related things pertinent to our community standards. Now, when I say that, one of the things I need to sort of point out is we're in an environment where we get all manner of referrals. Sometimes we get a formal referral, such as there was a citation or engagement, someone has properly documented that, or in housing, an RA or a professional staff person has documented behavior, in which case we have both identity, description of behavior, and a process that we can follow. A fair number of the reports that we've received this semester from off campus do not actually identify anybody who's engaged. They will say, we saw a cluster of students, or what appeared to be students in a particular locale. And that's certainly instructive information, and we can use that for our communications, for our follow-up, et cetera. There is no way to pursue enforcement when you don't know who the people are who are being reported. And we are still, because this is a quasi-disciplinary process, you still have to have some modicum of evidence. You can't just sort of make declarations about behavior. We still have due process obligations that flow from our Board of Governors, Board of Trustees, and with our own policies. Within all of those referrals, upwards of 300 students have been disciplined this semester. Several dozen have been removed from campus housing as a result of violating their community standards for housing or for the university or both. Several others have received various sanctions ranging depending on the gravity of the underlying offense, from written warnings or educational interventions up to and including restrictions on activities, et cetera. So there has been enforcement in place. And I know one of the questions that you all are wrestling with is how do we amplify that, make it more consistent, et cetera. The last thing I'll say, just by virtue of sort of preface to this conversation and being a resource, is one of the things that I think has been a disservice to all colleges and universities, including ours, is narratives that quickly emerge on the basis of singular anecdote. And so, you know, one of my good friend, Andy Perrin, many of you know, I've stolen this from him, so I'll give credit where credit's due. I've heard him say, you know, the plural of anecdote is not data. And I think he is exactly right. The fact that you hear of one or two large scale events, even if they are problematic, is not necessarily emblematic of what is actually happening in terms of the transmission of the virus. And so we know, for example, from our contact tracing, that a fair amount of the spread of this virus occurs in relatively small pods of individuals, 4, 5, 6 people, who are absolutely abiding in their mind with the community standards, particularly as it relates to gathering limits. They are under 10 people and always have been, but they mistakenly believe that because they are interacting with close friends, surely my friends don't have COVID, that they tend to be a little more lax than they should be in terms of engaging in that social distancing or wearing a mask. So one of the things I guess I want to personally caution based on experience from this semester, it is not that we do not want to address large scale mass gatherings or parties or events that should not occur, but we could regulate those out of existence and we will not have fully mitigated the spread of this virus. This virus is spreading because of its inherent virulence. And I think we also have to be terribly cautious of how do we find balance in that public health perspective of certainly having standards and being consistent in upholding them, but being careful not to vilify members of our community such that we discourage them from participating fully in the community or give the impression that you only get this if you commit a violation. That is a mistake. And I think so many other campuses have compounded that by pounding their chests and saying how much they have suspended folks, and yet they still have several thousand cases that are occurring in and about their campus. And so these are things I'm sure that are on your mind that you're thinking about, but I would just caution us as we think about an enforcement approach that, as with most good public policy and good public health requirements, it is not an all or nothing. And we will not enforce our way out of this any more than we enforce our way out of alcohol-related problems or other public health crises. It has to be a multidimensional approach to how we think about approaching and educating our students and our other members of the community. So I will get off my soapbox at that point and let you all have at it, but I'm happy to be available for questions and other concerns as people may have.
Before we move to Margaret, let's open the floor a little bit for some conversation with Jonathan. I see Seth has put a question in the chat about sorority and fraternity houses on or off campus. Whose purview is that? And so I know that's been an ongoing issue. So maybe to speak specifically, and I would like to know, what is happening in Greek houses now? I mean, are people living there? How many people are living there? What's going on?
Yeah, so I'll give, this would be a whole nother meeting potentially, but I'll do it as quickly as I can. So unlike many campuses, our Greek organizations, while recognized by the university, all of the houses, which are predominantly our IFC and Panhellenic groups, are off campus. They are not on university property. The university does not have enforcement jurisdiction at the present time for those properties. One of the considerations that I know is being looked at is whether there's a joint jurisdiction agreement that could be consummated between the town and between UNCPD. But UNC Police Department does not currently have jurisdiction for off-campus properties, which would not be inconsistent with most any municipality. Other campuses, Duke is one, plenty of others where they own the properties where those entities function, and so therefore have a natural degree of oversight that is greater simply because they have a very coercive authority insofar as they control the property. We do not. And in fact, we have at least one, maybe a couple of others, unrecognized fraternities that have, for one reason or another, lost university recognition, and they still function as unrecognized organizations for which we have no oversight or control, but people have a First Amendment right to associate with whom they choose, and we cannot regulate students joining an unrecognized fraternity, though we may strongly discourage it. With respect to the sort of way they're operating, many of them made plans. Every fraternity and sorority who had a house was required, and we really appreciate the partnership with our Orange County Health Department friends. Every organization was required to submit a plan, which was reviewed in concert with the Orange County Health Department, for both how they would manage the house itself, because some of them provide, of course, meal service, as well as place to sleep. It's considered a form of congregate living. There are often several people there. It can be, I guess, anywhere from 20 guys to, in some of the larger houses, there might be 30, 40, 50 people living under one roof. Most of the organizations do not have all of their members living in the house. They're not large enough. Some of the houses have seriously de-densified even before the start of this semester. Some have made other arrangements, but are still having people live in the house. Some have seen some decline since we moved to remote instruction for this semester. So there's a real variety of ways in which people are doing it. But I would venture to say most, Aaron Bockenheimer may know more than I on this, but I would say most of those fraternity and sorority houses remain open and have some complement of students still living there.
And how are they doing? Like, are they with community standards at the moment? I mean, what on a scale of 1 to 10? 10
I would
great.
I think I wouldn't say great. I wouldn't say poor. I mean, I think many, like most of our cohorts of students, some are doing really well, and we're not having a bit of problem. There are some others that are sort of consistently problems. And so I think we continue to address them. There have been cases already involving organizations in our disciplinary process. There will continue to be in all likelihood. One of the challenges, of course, is they have a sponsorship responsibility because they open their doors to functions and parties, et cetera. But plenty of non-Greek individuals wind up choosing to attend those functions. And so that's where we have the potential for spread back to other communities, be it off campus or our residence halls. Some of them have already been through pretty extensive quarantine and isolation periods because of their close quarters. If a positive case occurs in one of those houses, it's likely that the entire house will be quarantined. We do that obviously in consultation with our health partners and with Orange County Health Department. But they are like every other organization. I would say they are not doing everything we would like them to do, but to be honest, I'm not aware of a student group that's doing everything we would like them to do. Not just Greeks, it's students in general who are craving a lot of social interaction, and it is very hard to process that we are telling you, you cannot do the very thing that most makes this the experience that you're looking for.
And what about faculty and staff? I mean, can you tell us a little bit about these instances? I mean, we don't want to let our focus stray only to students. I mean, can you tell us anything about how that's gone? Or
it hasn't been a focal point for student affairs or for conduct for obvious reasons. They wouldn't come within our orbit. I mean, I certainly am. It's brought to my attention often by students. Some of not all of our faculty and staff. I don't, for example, maintain a social media presence, but many do. And some folks are a little less, thoughtful about what they post on social media. And it is still evident that we have people affiliated with the university who are not students, who are engaged in some of the very same behaviors that we're asking our students to refrain from. Now, I think there is often attended a rationalization to say, well, my party is not a fraternity party, so the gathering for, with wine and sandwiches in the backyard is different. It may be different socially. It's not different from the standpoint of being a risk of spread if people aren't wearing a mask and they're not socially distancing. And so, I do think that this is often one of the places that challenges any good enforcement mechanism is the perception of do what I say, but not what I do. And so, I don't know that that's widespread. I certainly couldn't attach statistics to it. I do think we need to be careful of putting the burden, just like, pushing back with our friends in the community. It is not only our students who are sometimes challenged. And I will say most of our students are doing an exceedingly good job. But as I've said before, 90% compliance is probably not enough in this pandemic. You got to get a lot closer to 100% in order to really significantly mitigate the kind of spread when you've got this many people in proximity to one another.
Thank you. I'm not seeing, all right, whoops, maybe I'm just not at the right place. Ooh, we do have lots of hands. Richard, sorry about that. I was
Yes.
down at the bottom.
Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here again with us. Thank you so much. And while you want to communicate caution, I'd like to communicate encouragement. I'm on the other end of this thought process. When you loosen restrictions, loosen regulations, you have an increase in number of cases. When you increase regulations and increase restrictions, you have a decrease in number of cases. And I would like to plead with the members of this committee that we should be on the page of decreasing the number of cases, not increasing them. Therefore, I would encourage each and every one of you to support increased restrictions and regulations, which is no different than what everybody supported the first day. Keep in mind, on paper, our recommendation was coupled with mandates, and there's no way you could really have effective mandates without regulations. So I would like to speak in support and encouragement of regulations and restrictions as being an essential aspect of what we're trying to do.
And Richard, I think we're not as far apart as you might think. I actually am a strong proponent of having consistent accountability, but I just want to caution against the notion that that is the only mechanism. I think we've got ample evidence from across the country. It doesn't work in isolation, but to the good work this committee is doing, it's a part of an overall puzzle from education, intervention, accountability, et cetera. But I think some folks have stopped at the accountability piece and just said, one strike and you're out, and therefore we'll solve this problem. It doesn't actually work quite in such a facile way, but I'm with you. I think we do need to have consistent enforcement of the standards we establish.
Okay, we've got a lot of hands up. Let's go. I'm just going to go down the line here. So to Ryan.
Yeah, I just had a question to go back to something that you said earlier about what we as the university can enforce, and this was the same question I think that Aaron had, which has to do with the role of UNC police. As sworn police officers, are they not obligated to enforce the laws of the state and by extension, the governor's mandate? How does UNC police fit into that?
I mean, it's a question I'm sure for Chief Perry to answer more accurately than I, but I agree with you. They are a sworn police department, but like all police departments, they also have discretion in the application of those laws. And so we certainly see that in, I think, probably most law enforcement jurisdictions of they may make observations and choose to respond to that in a variety of ways, a verbal warning, engagement, follow-up. It doesn't always result in an active citation. I think that's been true in Chapel Hill. It's probably true to some extent with UNCPD. Although I will note that many of the incidents we've encountered on campus, because we've seen very, very good general compliance on campus, at least in formal settings, so libraries, classroom settings, et cetera, where people get a little laxes in the residence hall community, and we wouldn't typically summon UNCPD to address a residence hall concern like that. That would be addressed by housing staff and documented as such.
If I can just jump in and maybe Ryan or Aaron, we need some clarity. I mean, are you asking, can UNC police be patrolling off campus? And that's a jurisdictional question. And I think Jonathan has already addressed the jurisdictional question. Until there's some change in the jurisdictional posture between UNC police and the town of Chapel Hill, the town of Chapel Hill is the responsibility of the town of Chapel Hill's police department, and UNC police, largely their footprint is campus. And with respect to gathering, there's no gatherings that are permitted currently on campus unless they've received special permission. So maybe I'm just misinterpreting what the question is, but it seems like there's maybe yes is the answer to UNC police are responsible for enforcing the law, including the governor's orders. But A, campus is separate and apart from the governor's orders, and B, I think they only have jurisdiction. I shouldn't say I think. They only have jurisdiction on campus or when asked to assist with a situation off campus. like a
comment
mutual
was
aid.
only in reference to Jonathan Saul's comment that we have no authority to enforce the rules of the governor. And that was my comment, which is your police do on your property.
Correct.
But I hear what you were saying. I think you were probably talking in the we have no authority. You may have been talking about student affairs staff or university administration that don't carry, that aren't with a badge.
Right. Yeah, it's a nuanced distinction, but again, if we were doing campus discipline, it would not be on the basis of the governor's order. If a UNC police officer issues a citation, they would go through the district court process like any other citizen or resident of the state. It doesn't automatically mean by committing a crime that you are subjected to campus disciplinary jurisdiction. That is only a policy-based jurisdiction. Again, it's a somewhat irrelevant distinction because for most events that occur on campus, it's coextensive. You violate the law, you also violate a campus policy. But we're not, strictly speaking, enforcing the law because we have no authority to do that. That's purely within law enforcement and the district attorney for the local county.
Can I jump in with one other clarification? And that is that the governor's mandate, like right now we're in phase 3, that doesn't mean, as I understand it, localities, both Orange County and UNC Chapel Hill could have restrictions in place that are more restrictive than the governor's mandate. Is that, I wanted to just kind of make sure we understood that. And I want to make sure I'm correct on that.
That's correct.
I think it's generally true. It's a good question for legal counsel. There were some exceptions in the early versions of the orders that made exceptions for state agencies, including universities. Some of those did not carry over in the latest governor's order. I don't know if that was an oversight or an intentional change. And in general, yes, unless there's a preemption where it says that you cannot, some states, Georgia, Florida, for example, you've seen that, where the governor's orders have preempted action by municipalities. That has not happened yet in North Carolina, to my knowledge, but it is always a good question for those in-house counsel to answer about when you can take a different position than the superseding state order.
Rich, you're up next.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I appreciate the desire to have a fair approach that addresses faculty, staff, and students equally. But let's not joke around here. I mean, faculty and staff are pretty much scared and staying at home. The students, on the other hand, are less scared, and that is where the problem really lies. So I have it, students in my class that are part of Greek Life are telling me that while they're not participating in parties, the parties are continuing to this day. It is out of control, and we need to get no tolerance, zero tolerance policies in place that can make this work going forward. So when I think about it, I think that we need to have a system that's put in place that if a student, faculty, or staff, but let's focus on students for now, are not following testing compliance, that they are dropped from classes. This has to be something where the testing has to be enforced. They have to do it, whether on or off campus, to be able to be participating in class. Then we should move on and think about what it means when students are caught with evidence of not practicing safe social distancing. And I think we need to have some sort of pretty severe penalties to put a stop to this. That is what brought the thing to a crashing halt in the fall, and it's going to happen again if we don't put in some sort of measures to prevent this from happening. So that's kind of where I'm sitting on it, and I think we need to put in some pretty severe penalties in place for those that violate the protocols and the guidelines and the rules that the university puts in place. It can be more restrictive than what the governor has put down. I think the university has the authority, if students are behaving non-safely, to take action that's severe to try to stop that from happening.
Aaron, are you still, is that a remnant hand or?
No, I think what we need locally and maybe cooperatively between our university, we lack a civil penalty. We only have a criminal penalty. You can violate the governor's order, which is a misdemeanor. What many communities have, when I talk to my peers across the country, is they have a civil penalty, a $100 fine or a $500 fine or a $1,000 fine. And yes, you can petition for your fine to be waived. And I know that fines disproportionately impact people. And when we spoke at the beginning, there was some concern, well, some people don't care about the fine. All of those are good arguments, but we still have a littering fine of $1,000, and we still have a $500 if you park in a fire lane. We didn't do away with those because they disproportionately impact people. And we have ways to resolve the disproportionate impact. I think we either on campus or off a penalty for violating. The hammer is too heavy, I think, that our police have, and so they don't issue it. They don't want to arrest the person and charge them with a crime. And so then we have this half enforcement. And I still think that a civil penalty would help. To Jonathan Saul's comment about what is the authority of the university over the fraternities, things may be different now, but I was briefly the director of Greek affairs. And my memory is that university recognition is the authority. And that when you withdraw your recognition, they fall out of zoning compliance with the town. They're required to be recognized by the university in order to exist in that zone. And when you deny their recognition, they must vacate their house because they have fallen out of zoning compliance. So you do have one other big stick.
That's no longer true, Aaron.
So they can be in a house not recognized by the university and operate. That's what you were referring to as a not recognized fraternity.
Not only not recognized by the university, but not recognized even by their national office. We have an organization that currently sits right in the middle of Big Fraternity Court that is not recognized by the university and is not recognized by their national office.
And so the town zoning rules must have changed.
Well,
The state law has
your
changed.
recollection is correct. The genesis for this was a change in state law following an event that happened at UNC Wilmington, where that university removed recognition, and then by virtue of some lobbying, the state law was changed, which preempts the ability of the local municipality to predicate ordinance recognition on recognition by the university. So they essentially took away from us, as all state universities, a very, very important tool that I would submit would be nice to get back. But until that happens, both the town and the university are largely hamstrung. And it's one of the reasons that we have only limited success if we take away recognition, because it doesn't force them to cease to operate.
I'm grateful for that clarification. Thank you.
Elizabeth.
Hey, Jonathan, thanks for talking with us today. I tend to agree with Rich's point, and particularly about, having a strong enforcement mechanism as it relates to testing compliance. But I also do recognize your point about, students meeting in groups of 4 and not really realizing that they aren't following the rules. So I guess what I'm wondering, if from your student affairs and student conduct perspective, can you offer any other examples of behavior that would fall on the more easily, there's more easily evidence of the misbehavior, and so it's a clearer path to addressing it. One thing that occurs to me is I recall hearing about, refusal to participate in contact tracing, which seems to me a pretty serious offense and one that we should consider strongly enforcing. And so I think it would be kind of helpful to think about like the scale of potential, failure to comply in terms of where are we seeing the most evidence, what's sort of, the most important to enforce, those sorts of things.
That's a good question. I mean, I think that you certainly have, as you do with most conduct violations, a broad continuum of behaviors. Sometimes it's as simple as somebody walks out of the residence hall room, they forgot their mask, and somebody says, "Hey, got to wear a mask." That encounter is probably more useful than trying to go through a formal process. The more willful though, and the more intentional and sort of planning that goes into not adhering, such as I'm going to host an event, I'm going to intentionally invite well more people than I'm either legally or by policy able to do. Or I am going to, in the case of the residence hall, for example, we have a restriction on no visitation. It's not fun for our students, but essentially the residence halls are limited to only those residents who live in that building. So you can't bring your friend, boyfriend, girlfriend, study hall mate, whomever can't come into that building. But we've had people when they have thwarted that, that has been often the case for essentially forfeiting the privilege to continue to live in the residence halls, because that usually doesn't happen just sort of by happenstance. You make a plan, and often it's attended by some sort of effort to conceal the fact that you're violating the policy. And so I think those obviously merit a stronger response. And I trust the judgment of our conduct folks to balance the appropriateness of the sanction. We need to have a range of sanctions up to and including disenrollment, which remains an option for us, or derecognition of an organization. I think there are cases where that may be appropriate. I'm with Rich. If we're going to impose a testing requirement, that's going to be easy enough to track whether or not someone submits to the test on the cadence that we require. And if they don't, I think that's an easy one to say, then you may forfeit the ability to remain a student here. Now, there's the mechanics behind that of like, do we do it the very first time that somebody misses it? Do we figure out, did they just miss the appointment on their phone? But I certainly don't think we could countenance serial non-compliance if I'm just not going to be a participant in something that's designed to protect and safeguard the community. I think it's one of the reasons we've talked about it actually less in formal disciplinary terms than as a condition of enrollment, because I liken it to a whole bunch of things you're required to do in order to be a student here. You have to pay tuition. You have to submit an immunization record. If you fail to do either of those things, we don't send you for discipline. We say you don't enjoy the right to be here, and we're going to terminate your current enrollment or cancel your registration. I think it's very similar. And I actually kind of agree with Rich's point of then you are disenrolled from class. It's not a question of even approaching it as a moral failure like we do in many of our disciplinary pieces, but just this is what was required. You didn't do what was required, so therefore you can't be here. It's a pretty straightforward conversation, but that's easiest in those places where you have an easy way to say yes or no. So either the test was done or it was not done. That usually isn't very susceptible unless there's just error somewhere to some difference of opinion. Trying to sort of litigate the question of social distancing. Was I 6 feet? Was I 4 feet? How long was I in proximity? That becomes tougher. We would love all black and white cases, but we almost never get them. And I know that's a hazard in your world too. I would love it if these cases were easy. They just don't show up on our doorstep as stark as you might think.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, would it be fair to say that to the extent we can identify the easy ones, failure to test, failure to engage with the health department in contact tracing, maybe just those two, but if there's others, that those, it may be helpful to think of addressing those black and white scenarios where there's going to be ample evidence as a condition of enrollment and sort of unburden student conduct with those, and then have student conduct, or whatever body is determined, address them, the more social distancing, did you forget your mask on purpose sort of things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm open always to, especially depending on what comes out of the collective wisdom of this group and others, to find as easy a way to do it. I will say that there's no completely easy way, because there's no system that is devoid of process. We simply cannot just do it without any kind of opportunity to be heard. That doesn't mean it has to necessarily take a long time. We've processed nearly 500 referrals in 2.5 months. So, we are fairly, now again, a lot of that was front loaded, and we have seen a far less frequent number of cases in the last month, not no cases, but far fewer cases than we were seeing right at the beginning of the semester when this was started in earnest. So, we'll look for ways to streamline. It's one of the reasons we're not using our existing infrastructure of discipline. We have a 2-page administrative review process that is designed to provide the minimum due process required, but to expedite moving cases through. We're not doing the laborious process that normally attends a conduct case.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry. I just wanted to add quickly to Jonathan's point, although some of those disciplinary non-testing compliance might seem straightforward. I know both University of Illinois and University of New Hampshire were telling us that just dealing with the non-compliance and testing is keeping their team completely busy. So, you know, and figuring out is that you didn't test for 2 weeks, like what's the cutoff that you decide, and then what's the process? I know they said they're super busy just chasing those students that aren't compliant.
So I want to kind of interrupt us if I could. Lamar and Tom, I wondered if I could ask you to hold your questions briefly because Margaret Campbell has joined us from the health department. And so it might be good to hear about her experience or the health department's experience with contact tracing. What were they hearing? What were those sorts of problems? And then we can come back to continue our discussion and ask other questions or bring up other issues with both of these groups, if that would be okay with the two of you. Is that Tom and Lamar, would that be all right?
It's fine.
Okay, thank you so much. Margaret, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yes, so I'm Margaret Campbell. I am a nurse practitioner and also leading the contact tracing and case investigation teams at the Orange County Health Department. And I think, Elizabeth, what you were just mentioning is a lot of what we are thinking about at Orange County. We, worked very closely with Campus Health, this summer and then into the fall semester with case investigation and contact tracing. And we're actively working right now to sort of reformat a little bit of what we're doing so that we can be more efficient and more effective moving forward, and especially in the spring semester. And many of the UNC students were very cooperative and answered all of our questions and, gave us lists of contacts, close contacts that they had, and were just in general great and really helpful. But we have had a fair number of students, and we continue to have a fair number of students who are refusing to give us information about close contacts. And or refusing to give us, full information about the case investigation, or we are having a very hard time getting them to pick up the phone or to, give us a call back even after, we call and leave messages and text and, identify ourselves. I think especially the thing that concerns me the most is the students that give us the information about themselves, but then do not share the information about their close contacts. And as you're sort of thinking about, places where it might be beneficial to have some form of pressure that you can put on students, consequences that for them, I think not participating or not giving information about close contacts would be something that from the health department's perspective and for public health in general might be helpful. Because I think that many of the students are not fully clear that it is part of the set expectations and community standards that they participate with it. And it is from the health department's point of view, it is sort of hard to have that conversation with students because we're not part of the university. And so, potentially having consequences, but especially making it just like very, very, very clear to all students that like they need to participate with the case investigation and contact tracing. And also that sometimes that may mean that like multiple people from both Campus Health and the health department are contacting them, and that yes, that can be obnoxious and annoying, but for public health reasons, to protect the community on campus and the community like beyond campus, it's just really, really important.
Margaret, I wanted to ask, are you seeing similar trends in other parts of the community? I mean, is this a situation where, I mean, we did start this discussion with the notion that there are problems around staying within public health guidelines in all parts of our campus community, in all parts of the community at large, across the state, that there are different views on these things. People, I mean, it's highly politicized, as we all know, those sorts of things. So we're although student enforcement is obviously a critical piece, we do want to think broadly. So, I mean, what are you seeing in terms of non-student students that you contact? I mean, how compliant are other people with contact tracing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has been, publicized nationwide that this is a problem for us as a whole, and that there are people that do not want to share contact information, do not want to participate with close contacts or with case investigation, sorry. I will say that it does seem that UNC students are a little bit more resistant to sharing information about their close contacts. And to answer one of the questions, I think that there's a variety of reasons that students don't want to share the close contacts. And it's hard to figure that out when you're talking to the person that is just refusing to give you that information. But I think that they don't want to there's a fear of getting in trouble. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get their students or their friends to get in trouble. And then I think especially around Greek life, they're concerned about consequences for, if there were parties and other social events, that they might get in trouble for having had those events. From the health department, yes, we don't want them to be partying in ways that put people at risk, but we are not going to be the enforcers of past parties. It's more like we at the health department, like the contact tracer, they just need that list of names and numbers so that we can quarantine effectively.
So we have some hands up. Tom, I'll go to you. Elizabeth, is that a remnant or is that?
It's a new question for Margaret.
Okay, let me start with Tom and then we'll come back to you, Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan, it's good to see you again. Jonathan and I served on the Committee on Student Conduct many years ago together. Jonathan, it's a clarifying question. I mean, I think I'm, generally in agreement with what I'm hearing broadly, which is that people are supportive of having, very clear standards and very clear messaging so that there will be plenty of carrots about why we need to, all do this in order to keep our community safe. But also, I personally think that there needs to be very strict enforcement. And I would even, when we were talking about this before, I used the term draconian, where people would really be punished. And in my view, it would be fantastic if that happened like in the first week of classes and if it were widely publicized. You said something earlier, though, that I just didn't quite catch, and you were talking about kind of the downsides, the unintended negative effects of draconian, or that's what it sounded like to me anyway, of draconian enforcement measures. But I didn't quite understand kind of what you were talking about. I was hoping that you could clarify that.
Yeah, it's not enough to dissuade me that we need to have those, but I think we've seen some good social science research that's been emerging because this is around already a highly divisive issue, and because so many people are sort of assertive about this it's my right not to. Whether we buy that or not, we know there's a large contingent of folks. So the more sort of we create an adversarial relationship, the less we are actually able to successfully encourage people to do it for the reasons that we want them to do it. And so, there's, again, I'm not the scholar on this, but there's some really good research showing that it's having the sort of unintended effect of causing more people to be stalwart in saying, I'm not going to let the authority, in this case, the university, tell me how to live my life. And so they, and even in small ways, are overtly resistant. And I thought Lamar put something really effective in the chat, which is among the recommendations we put out in a separate group. This has to be paired, regardless of where we wind up, this has to be paired with a really effective communications and campaign that is designed. I mean, most things are, you have to have the consent of people to be willing to do it. If 10,000 students say we're not doing this, we're not going to be able to suspend 10,000 students. It ends the experiment. So to some extent, you have to get the compliance first before you ever get into the enforcement piece, because there's not enough capacity anywhere for us to just demand that by virtue of we're going to impose it. And so I guess I've been around this enough time and reading some of that I get a little wary when I think, and I'm not saying that's what's here, because again, I'm really kind of 90% probably where many of you are, but I see what happens when we mobilize the indignity of, I can't believe people are doing this. We need stronger and stronger sanctions. But if we don't actually pair that with all of the other work, I have no history that tells me it's going to be successful. It doesn't mean it's not a part. I think clear, consistent standards, even high standards of accountability, but just doing that in lieu of all the other measures from a public health perspective, population level work, communications, I have no evidence that I could point you to say it'll be successful.
Okay, that's very helpful, and I'd say that I'm in agreement that it seems to me that both are really important, but my view anyway, and maybe it's partly because I'm a lawyer, but actually I know you are too, but my view is that the enforcement has to be a significant part of it. Thanks.
I want to bring Lamar back into the conversation because his hand was up, and then I'll go to our other panelists that have hands up.
Yeah, well, Jonathan, thank you. You named a very big piece of what I was going to say, which is that the community enforcement won't be enough alone. There's the communication piece, and there's also the engagement piece. And Jonathan, you also said something else I really appreciate, being a psychology major myself. We have some psychology going on in our own psychology department at UNC that has proven that sometimes it has the reverse priming effect, as far as social science, where people, no matter what age, are less likely to comply if they feel like they're being over enforced on certain things, whether it's COVID, pre-pandemic, or what have you. I think that the biggest issue is that we can say, we don't want you to socialize in groups bigger than 4, what have you. We don't want you to come within 6 feet of each other. That's one piece. And then there's an entirely different piece which says, we don't want you to do this, but here are your options to study with each other on campus. Here are your options to socialize in a safe way on campus. Here are your options to find some wellness activities on campus and to engage. I can promise you that my peers will not be as likely to follow community standards if they have absolutely no option. I think it's very crucial to focus on developmentally. You talk about college students, developmentally, who are coming to college, who are in very rigorous academic programs, who need that type of wellness, who need a type of engagement. And if we're not providing that piece, right, how can we truly and ethically expect them to adhere to stringent community standards without engaging them on those other fronts? So I do think it's a two-part thing here. If we're going to say stricter community standards, that's completely fine. But we also need this entire other side that says, okay, we have stricter community standards. Let's do these other things to engage students and also incentivize, right? Follow community standards. If you follow community standards, come to campus. We have these things for you virtually, in person. That's proven to work at other universities as well.
Thank you. And I think in the chat, the other thing that has come up related to this is the really good work that is happening on the campuses of HBCUs around creating a culture that supports community standards. And I know in other places we've talked about reaching out to find out more information about how those cultures are being created. So that's a good thing. And
we never recognize, I'm so sorry, but I feel like we were remiss in not recognizing the loss of one of our academic leaders locally with the president dying of COVID-19. I believe it was St. Augustine. And I just wanted to mention that because that was a tragic loss to all of North Carolina. And I think we'd be remiss in not recognizing that, we lost somebody within the field of education due to COVID, among a lot of other people, but that was a huge profile loss.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Richard. Let's go to Ryan, and then we'll go back to Elizabeth and then to Aaron.
I wanted to go back to one of the points that Margaret raised on the question of contact tracing. And I think you indicated that one of the concerns was that people were hesitant to perhaps report some of their close contacts because they were worried about getting in trouble for unauthorized gatherings or something like that. I don't know how prominent of a problem that is, and if this runs too much against our policy of wanting more enforcement. But I mean, can we build in some sort of, like they do with alcohol, some sort of like Good Samaritan thing where it's like, we just want to make sure that people that may be exposed or aware, so we can prevent a worse situation. We're not necessarily interested in like finding out what you did to potentially give it to these other people. So I just wonder if that's something that we can do as part of that communication, to say it's more important. It's important that you know these rules, but it's also, we don't want you to use fear of those enforcements to prevent you from us getting the information to the people who might have been exposed. So that's just something else to think about as we thread that line between voluntary reporting versus enforcement.
And Ryan, I can say that language it may need to be clarified, but that concept is in the existing health monitoring guideline, that the information collected during contact tracing will only be used for the clinical purpose. We don't use it for enforcement. And there's a barrier erected. I don't talk to the Orange County Health Department or Campus Health about what they learn from a conduct perspective. That's purely for medical reasons.
Elizabeth?
This may butt up against what Ryan and Jonathan were just talking about, but Margaret, one thing I took from what you said was that perhaps there was some concern on the part of students about, being contacted by Orange County Health Department, sort of an unknown entity to them. Maybe they don't even, recognize that as the county health department for UNC. So I was wondering if there has been any discussion of perhaps deputizing UNC employees to do that contact tracing, particularly as it relates to students, to sort of minimize that problem. And I think it would also have, some benefits on the employment side that I could talk about, but just wondering if that's something that's been discussed or would even be possible.
So, we have at Campus Health, there are a lot of UNC staff that are working with sort of part of the case investigation and contact tracing. But it is the public health legal responsibility to do the case investigation and contact tracing. And so a lot of it really does, we are trying to collaborate as much as we can, but we have that legal authority and therefore also the legal responsibility to do it. So it needs to come from us. That said, we would really appreciate any and all messaging that really sort of informs the student body at large of that, and sort of who public health is, who the local health department is, and that this is, part of those community standards.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Aaron?
Margaret, I like your last comment. The humanizing of the health department might help. I don't know if you need full page ads with all your smiling faces, not looking like scary people. Hey, when your phone rings, it's us. It's not going to be so bad.
We are super happy to work with you on any of that.
Let's see what we can do there. I'd like the notion of incentives. I heard early on that folks were resistant because they didn't want to get quarantined. But maybe like jury duty, quarantine needs to come with a moderate reward. For every day you're in quarantine in the quarantine dorm, we're going to give you a $25 gift card to dining hall. Is there some where it isn't only miserable, but there is some upside to your participation? To Ryan's question, I'd like the Good Samaritan-ness. We really need to highlight that your participation. So Margaret, when you tell people that nothing you learn will cause them any hassle or hardship with the authorities or with the university, that doesn't help?
It does for some people. And some people, we just remind them of community standards and they're like, oh yeah, here's all this information that you need. And other people are a lot more hesitant.
I imagine this isn't when you do STD tracing and other sorts of things, I imagine you're having to have awkward conversations where people are resistant to telling you who they've been close with. Are there strategies you find successful there that we can apply here or that we can help with?
I mean, so much of case investigation and contact tracing comes from HIV and, other STDs. And so we are trying. It is hard because so much of what worked so well with the HIV epidemic involved personal face-to-face communications. And this is a respiratory pandemic. So all of these tools that worked so well in the past just serve to, put more people at risk and further spread the disease. So We are doing our best. I think, that information, like explaining what contact tracing and case investigation is, like, really educating people about like who and what like local health departments are, because this day and age, many people, and especially I think younger people, do not know, can be really helpful.
And Margaret, would you agree that a lot of the challenges, just even if you have a contact, is, I mean, when I was looking at some of I've heard that there are lots of empty cells. Like there's just a lot of like no information, even if you have. So, and that's true in HIV, STD. Like people, even if they tell you, they don't know their number or their last name, or So sometimes it's just you don't have a lot of information to even do the tracing, right?
It is, and that is where I think because we are working so closely with the university, we can do a lot more with less information, because there are student rosters, and so we do have the ability to like make contact tracing much more effective, and just remembering that with contact tracing, like that is what slows spread, like that is what reduces like disease transmission, like this is what saves lives. And with the university, like we can make contact tracing even more effective if people will work with us. And so that is really just all we want. Even with like a name and like, oh, they live in this dorm on this floor, we can probably figure out who that is.
But their failure to comply with contact tracing, you're not allowed to tell student affairs that. You can't say, we keep calling Tommy and Tommy won't talk to us. If you have this wall between the two of you and are protecting Tommy's privacy.
I don't know that barrier is there. I think it is the information that's transmitted, but the absence of information or non-participation, I don't think is a disclosure of confidential information. But that's not always easy, right? I mean, there's what we know and what we can prove. Sometimes we know that the likelihood is that they have more contacts than they're disclosing. And Margaret and her team do this work really well, and they have great instincts. They know when we're not getting the full story. That's not the same, though, as them necessarily starting the conversation by saying, I'm overtly not cooperating with you, regardless of what you ask. We just know that they're not cooperating with us because, we will have maybe talked to 3 or 4 other close contacts in the same event, and then suddenly they weren't at that event when 4 other people have already identified them as being one of the close contacts. So I can tell you from the fall, the biggest dilemma was nobody wanted to go to quarantine isolation. Nobody wanted to be shut down for 10 days. And so they were even testing on campus to actively avoid that prospect.
Margaret, I was going to ask you, if you order someone quarantined, which prohibits them from going to work and other things like that, do you all feed them and care for them when they are ordered quarantined by you?
So we do our best to connect people to the resources that they need. So outside of the university system, we do, when people tell us that, they're going to have a hard time paying their rent, or they're going to have a hard time paying their bills, or they can't get groceries, or they don't have anybody to like bring the groceries to them, and they don't have, money to get groceries delivered, or we connect to social workers, and our social worker team at Orange County does an amazing job connecting people to all of these resources in our community. We've had social workers delivering, baby formula and diapers and, groceries at like 9 o'clock on a Friday night because like somebody didn't have the things that they needed to get, through the weekend. For campus, for students, we are typically working closely with campus health, and then, student services in general to make sure that they have the housing and, the food, and all of the resources that they need.
I'll ask one more question. If an employee is quarantined and cannot go to work, do they lose 2 weeks if they're an hourly wage earner, would they lose, I don't know who I'd ask this to, would they lose their wages? Or does the university have snow days or snowbank or COVID bank to pay people if they're ordered quarantined?
Erin, I think I can probably answer that. So there's special leave provisions for most employees. I think it's 2 weeks of emergency paid sick leave. And then there's some additional FML that is available as well, particular to COVID reasons. And then there is also a COVID-19 special leave bank that employees can apply for shared leave if they exhaust those other options.
I'm just curious on what are the impediments to people participating, what might keep them, how might we incent and reward, and if we need to generate resources to help reward the students who are confessing their COVID and needing to be quarantined, maybe we can be a partner in that.
One thing I want to add to what Erin said also, we are also going through this in our community, in the restaurant business and all these merchants around here. And we found out that it is tax deductible if the business paid their employees while they quarantine. It's you can write it off your taxes. So this is something that many businesses have been doing it. I'm a member of the West End Merchant Group here, which is restaurants and business in the area. And we have been paying our employees and we've been writing them off totally 100%. So this is something to think about.
Okay, good. Your employees are fortunate to have you.
Many of us doing that, not just me. Like Erin knows this, I think, and many of the businesses are doing that. And also sending food to employees from other businesses and other restaurants. Many businesses around here, especially restaurants, participating in sending food to the homes of those quarantines as a charity. Yeah, we have a few good businesses that are doing that.
Terrific. So we are about at time. And so knowing that these today and next are discussion days, we don't have to come to resolution on these things right now. So what I would ask, I think, for the committee is to just sort of let this roll around in your head, all of this discussion. What do you think are the kind of, as that gels into something, maybe share it on our listserv, kind of thoughts that are coming your way, critical pieces that maybe we didn't cover that we need to cover, information. Some of you know about really great initiatives that are happening other places that seem to be working. If you want to share that in that way over the course of the next week, then we'll come back together and talk next week some more. We'll do the recommendation for the first part, and we'll do that just as the co-chairs and relay it, although it will be displayed on the Carolina Together website under the Community Advisory Group. I'll also try and write a little recap of this conversation, sort of just trying to distill some key points, but not in a recommendation kind of framework, just sort of key points of information that came up that seem to be important in these different domains. So that might take a few days, but we'll do that too.
Mimi, can I take a minute to thank Jamil for donating to the Employee Forum scavenger hunt?
It's our duty. We are honored to do that. We're all in it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mimi, before we close, I just wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Holland, from the American Studies Department, who did set up a mutual aid fund for LGBTQ community members during this crisis and this pandemic. I want to thank her out of the kindness of her heart. A lot of my peers have benefited from that, and they've been telling me about that. So thank you, Dr. Holland.
That's great. Thank you, Sharon. That's amazing. Really great.
Thank you, Lamar.
All right. Well, terrific. Well, so good to be with everyone, and we'll have more conversation. Thank you, Margaret, for being here. Appreciate that. And thank you, Jonathan, for all of the information you provided. Our campus safety commission, I don't know whether they actually ended up being with us or not. I'm just realizing that they did not come into the conversation.
Jim is with us. He was in the background. Thanks so much. Really interesting and glad to meet you all. Jim Harrington.
Jim, maybe you'll join us again next week, and we'll bring you more deliberately into the conversation. I apologize for that.
No problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good make sure you vote.
Yes, thank you, Jamil. Make sure you vote.